The galactic preserve stretched across 3 continents on 442b, housing the most dangerous creatures from across the known galaxy. Director's forearms trembled as she read the priority message that had just arrived through the quantum relay network. "Impossible," she whispered, her translucent blue skin shifting to a pale yellow of fear. The message bore the seal of the Galactic Council's Emergency Threat Assessment Division. Priority Alpha Classification. To Director 442b Preserve. Subject Emergency Containment Protocol Species Classification. Predator. A new specimen has been captured from the recently discovered Sol system. Species designation, Homo, classification level, extreme threat. This creature represents the most dangerous predatory species ever encountered. Immediate level 9 containment required. No direct contact permitted under any circumstances. Had seen many dangerous creatures in her 40 cycles as director. The crystalline death spiders of Vega VII that could slice through starship hulls. The phase wraiths from the dark matter nebulae that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The living plasma entities that fed on electrical systems. But none had ever received an extreme threat classification. The specimen transport arrived 3 days later under military escort. 6 battle cruisers accompanied the containment vessel, their weapons systems active and shields raised. Captain, a battle-scarred veteran of the conflicts, personally oversaw the transfer. "Director," he growled through his mandibles, "I've fought in 7 galactic wars and faced creatures that haunt my sleep cycles. But this thing," he paused, his compound eyes reflecting genuine fear. "It killed 3 of my crew members during transport, barehanded, through reinforced barriers that should have been impossible to breach." The containment unit was unlike anything had seen. Constructed from quantum-locked and surrounded by force fields that could contain a small star, it hummed with barely restrained energy. Warning lights flashed in 17 different spectrums, and the biohazard symbols covered every surface. "What exactly are we dealing with?" asked as they wheeled the container toward the maximum security wing. Captain consulted his tactical display. "According to it's a bipedal mammalian species from the 3rd planet of the Sol system. They call their world Earth. The creature stands approximately 1.8 meters tall, weighs about 80 kilograms, and appears deceptively fragile." Fragile, but the threat assessment suggests. "That's what makes them so terrifying, Director. They look harmless. No natural armor, no obvious weapons, no enhanced physical abilities, but they're persistent hunters. They can track prey across vast distances, surviving in conditions that would kill most species. Their minds are capable of abstract reasoning that borders on precognition, and their social structures. They form pack bonds so strong they'll sacrifice themselves without hesitation for their group." As they passed through 17 security checkpoints, each more elaborate than the last, continued his briefing. "They've only achieved interstellar travel recently, but they've already engaged in warfare with the collective. A single human vessel destroyed an entire fleet using tactics no one had ever conceived. They don't just fight to win, Director. They fight to ensure their enemies can never threaten them again." The maximum security wing had been designed to hold the most dangerous specimens in the galaxy. Each enclosure was a miniature world, carefully crafted to meet the specific needs of its inhabitant while ensuring absolute containment. The void kraken from the clouds slumbered in its tank of liquid methane. The hive mind collective from Rigel pulsed with malevolent intelligence behind psychic dampening fields. But the new enclosure at the end of the hall dwarfed them all. The humans' habitat took up an entire section designed to replicate their home environment. Artificial sunlight streamed through the dome, illuminating a landscape of grass, trees, and flowing water. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. "Where is it?" whispered, scanning the seemingly empty habitat. "There," Captain pointed with a trembling claw, "by the water feature." Activated her optical enhancers and gasped. The creature was sitting calmly on a rock, its appearance exactly as described. 2 arms, 2 legs, a relatively small head covered in dark hair, wearing simple fabric coverings. It looked up at them with forward-facing eyes, the mark of a predator, and the expression on its face was utterly calm. "It's been its environment since arrival," explained. "Testing the barriers, studying the surveillance systems, mapping every centimeter of its enclosure. It hasn't shown aggression, hasn't attempted escape. It just watches and learns." The human stood slowly, its movements fluid and controlled. Even this simple action radiated a predatory grace that made survival instincts scream warnings. The creature walked to the transparent aluminum viewing barrier and placed one hand against it. Its eyes met hers, and she felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was being evaluated by something higher on the food chain. The psychological profiles are the most disturbing aspect, Captain continued quietly. These creatures don't just hunt for food or territory, they hunt for sport. They'll track dangerous prey simply for the challenge, and they have something I've never encountered before. They call it empathy. They can understand and predict the thoughts and emotions of other species. It makes them incredibly effective at manipulation. The human tilted its head slightly as if listening. Then, impossibly, it smiled. The expression should have been reassuring, but instead it sent chills through both observers. There was intelligence in that smile and something else. Amusement. Director, one of her staff members, called over the comm system. We have a situation developing near the main viewing area. Reluctantly tore her gaze away from the human. What kind of situation? It's the opening ceremony for the new public education wing. The ambassador's family is here for the ribbon cutting, including their offspring. The blood drained from his face. Young beings of any species were naturally curious, drawn to new sights and experiences. The idea of children anywhere near this facility while housing such a dangerous predator made her sick with fear. Implement lockdown protocols immediately, she ordered. No one gets within 50 meters of the maximum security wing. But as she spoke, she noticed something that chilled her to the bone. The human had moved closer to the barrier, and its head was turned toward the direction of the main complex. Somehow, despite the soundproofing and distance, it seemed to have heard something. Its expression had changed again, becoming softer, more curious. Director, her assistant's voice crackled through the comm with barely controlled panic. The ambassador's offspring has wandered away from the group. Security is searching, but they were last seen heading toward your sector. Captain's compound eyes widened in horror. A young one, here, with that thing? He began barking orders into his tactical comm. All units, priority 1 alert, civilian juvenile in danger zone, establish a perimeter and... A soft chime echoed through the facility, the sound of a security door being. Heart stopped beating as she realized what had happened. Somewhere in the complex, a small being with natural curiosity and no understanding of danger had stumbled upon the one place it should never go. The human's head snapped around with predatory precision, focusing on some distant sound only it could hear. For the first time since its arrival, the creature showed real interest in something beyond its immediate surroundings. It moved with fluid grace toward the section of its enclosure closest to the main complex, every line of its body radiating focused attention. We need to evacuate the facility, whispered, now. But even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late. Somewhere in the maze of corridors and exhibits, the galaxy's most dangerous predator had detected the presence of a vulnerable young being. And despite every precaution, every barrier, every security measure, she had the terrible certainty that this day would end in disaster. The human pressed both hands against the barrier now, its eyes fixed on something beyond their sight. Its expression had changed yet again, becoming something that chilled her more than rage or hunger would have. It looked concerned. 3-year-old Hai had the natural curiosity that defined all young beings. Her silver fur sparkled with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with her emotions, currently displaying the bright blues and greens of excitement and wonder. She had wandered away from her parents during the boring adult ceremony, drawn by the fascinating sounds and smells coming from the restricted areas of the zoo. Her small hands easily slipped through gaps in the security barriers that had been designed to stop adult-sized beings. Her tiny frame allowed her to crawl through maintenance access ways that no security protocol had considered. In her innocent exploration, she had bypassed 17 different security systems simply by being too small and young to trigger them. Meanwhile, in the maximum security wing, alarms blared throughout the facility. Director coordinated the search from the central command center, her 4 arms working frantically across multiple control interfaces. Security feeds showed empty corridors, locked doorways, and sealed barriers, but no sign of the missing child. Sector 7 clear, reported Security Chief on through the comm system. His team had been methodically searching every accessible area. Moving to Sector 8. Negative, responded, her voice tight with stress. Sector 8 contains the predator specimens. The child couldn't have reached there. But even as she spoke, a chill ran down her spine. Her security systems were designed to keep dangerous creatures in, not to track small beings moving through areas they weren't supposed to access. What if the impossible had become possible? In his enclosure, the human had begun to pace. His movements were no longer calm and controlled. Something had triggered his hunting instincts, and Captain watched with growing horror as the creature's behavior changed. The human's breathing had quickened, his muscles tensed for action, and his eyes constantly scanned the environment for threats or opportunities. "It knows something we don't," whispered into his calm. "The predator has detected something. Whatever's happening, it's aware of it." The human suddenly stopped packing and pressed his ear against the barrier wall. His expression became intensely focused, as if he was listening to something far beyond normal hearing range. Then his head snapped toward the eastern wall of his enclosure, the direction that led to the maintenance corridors. Little Hai had discovered a wonderful new playground. The maintenance tunnels were full of interesting pipes and cables that hummed with energy. Colorful lights blinked in patterns she didn't understand but found fascinating. She giggled softly to herself as she crawled through a particularly narrow section, her bioluminescent fur casting dancing shadows on the walls. She emerged from an access panel into a corridor filled with the most amazing sounds she'd ever heard. Growls and roars and clicking noises came from behind thick barriers on either side of the walkway. This was clearly where they kept the most interesting animals, and her young mind was filled with excitement at the prospect of seeing creatures she'd never encountered before. The warning signs meant nothing to a child who couldn't read standard galactic script. The biohazard symbols looked like interesting decorations. The force field barriers created pretty light patterns that made her clap her hands in delight. To 3-year-old Hai, this was the most wonderful place in the entire facility. In the command center, S worst fears were confirmed when a maintenance sensor detected movement in the maximum security wing. "Impossible," she breathed, watching the tiny heat signature moving through corridors that should have been completely inaccessible. "Director," her assistant's voice cracked with panic, "the movement signature is heading directly toward the human's enclosure." S tactical analysis unit had reached the same conclusion. "The child is in the predator section. We need immediate evacuation protocols for all personnel and emergency containment breach procedures." "Wait," said, studying the readings more carefully. "The human's containment is still secure. The child is in the outer corridors, not inside the actual habitat. We can reach her before." Her words were cut off by a new alarm. One of the facility's automated systems had detected what it classified as a containment breach. Not because anything had escaped, but because the readings from the human's enclosure had changed dramatically. The creature's stress levels, heart rate, and neural activity had spiked to levels they'd never recorded before. "What's happening to it?" demanded. Captain studied his instruments with growing confusion. "I don't understand these readings. The creature appears to be in some kind of distress, but not the kind we'd expect from a predator preparing to attack. It's more like..." He paused, consulting with his expert through a quick data burst. "Director, this is going to sound impossible, but the readings suggest the human is experiencing what our databases classify as protective anxiety. The creature isn't preparing to hunt. It's preparing to protect something." Little Hai had found the most interesting window yet. Through the transparent barrier, she could see a strange creature unlike anything in her young experience. It looked similar to the pictures in her storybooks of the mythical beings her parents called monsters. But this one didn't look scary at all. The creature was looking right at her with eyes that seemed kind. It had approached the barrier slowly, making no sudden movements that might frighten her. When she pressed her tiny hand against the transparent wall, the creature did something remarkable. It pressed its own hand against the barrier directly opposite hers. Hai giggled with delight. The creature's hand was so much bigger than hers, but it was warm, and somehow she could sense that it meant her no harm. She began chattering to it in her native language, telling it about her day and how she'd gotten lost and found this wonderful place full of amazing animals. The human listened intently to her babbling, his expression softening into something that, watching through the security feeds, couldn't understand. The galaxy's most dangerous predator was looking at the child with what appeared to be genuine affection. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "A According to every behavioral model, every psychological profile, it should be evaluating her as prey. Instead, the human was slowly sitting down to bring himself closer to the child's eye level. He began making soft sounds that Hai found soothing and entertaining. She couldn't understand his language, but the tone was clearly meant to comfort and engage her. "Director," came an urgent voice over the comm. "We have teams moving toward the maximum security wing, but it will take at least 10 minutes to reach the child's location through the security protocols." 10 minutes, felt panic rising in her chest. That child could be in mortal danger, the predator could. She stopped speaking as she watched the security feed. The human had begun doing something that everything they knew about his species. He was entertaining the child. Using facial expressions and hand gestures, he was making her laugh. His movements were deliberately non-threatening, designed to keep her calm and happy. "Captain," she called to, "are you seeing this?" The military officer was studying his tactical displays with complete bewilderment. "Director, this contradicts every piece of intelligence we have on this species. A predator should not exhibit protective behavior toward an unrelated offspring of a different species. It's unprecedented in galactic xenobiology." But that was exactly what they were witnessing. The human had somehow recognized that Hai was a child, understood that she was lost and alone, and instead of seeing an opportunity for an easy meal, had appointed himself her guardian. When Hai began to look around nervously, perhaps finally realizing she was in an unfamiliar place, the human's response was immediate. He moved closer to the barrier and began projecting what could only be described as reassurance. His voice took on tones that transcended language barriers, the universal sounds that intelligent beings use to comfort their young. "He's protecting her," realized with shock. "The galaxy's most dangerous predator is protecting a child." The truth was even more complex than she understood. The human had assessed the situation with the speed and precision that made his species so dangerous. He had identified a vulnerable juvenile in a potentially hazardous environment, evaluated her emotional state, and made a decision that spoke to something fundamental in human nature. Despite being trapped in a cage, labeled as a monster, and treated as a threat to all galactic civilization, his first instinct upon encountering a lost child was not to harm but to help. As security teams finally reached the outer perimeter of the maximum security wing, they found a scene that would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. A small child sat safely outside the most secure containment unit ever constructed, happily playing hand games with the creature inside who was supposed to be the universe's greatest nightmare. The predator had found his prey, and instead of devouring her, he had chosen to keep her safe. The security team approached with weapons drawn and containment equipment ready, expecting to find the worst-case scenario. Instead, they discovered little Hai sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in what appeared to be a game with the human inside his enclosure. Security Chief On had prepared for everything except this. His tactical training covered hostage situations, predator attacks, and containment breaches. Nothing in his extensive military experience had prepared him for the sight of a child playing patty cake with the galaxy's most dangerous creature. "Hold positions," he whispered into his comm, afraid that any sudden movement might trigger the human's predatory instincts. "Do not approach the child." Through the secure observation window, Director watched the impossible scene unfold. The human had somehow fashioned simple toys from materials in his enclosure, twisted fibers that looked like dolls, arrangements of stones that resembled games. He was sliding these across the floor of his habitat toward the barrier, clearly trying to entertain Hai. "Director," her consultant's voice crackled through the comm system, "we're getting readings that suggest the human is experiencing elevated levels of oxytocin and other bonding hormones. The same neurochemical responses we see in parent-offspring relationships across dozens of species." "That's impossible," replied. "Bonding doesn't occur spontaneously, especially not between predator and prey species." But the evidence was right in front of her eyes. The human had somehow formed an emotional connection with the child in the space of minutes. Every movement, every sound he made was calculated to keep her calm and entertained. When she showed signs of getting tired or frightened, he immediately adjusted his behavior to provide comfort. Captain had been consulting with the Galactic Council's experts through quantum communication. "Director, I'm receiving analysis that changes everything we thought we knew about this species." What kind of analysis? The humans aren't just predators. They're also caretakers. Their young are born completely helpless and require years of intensive care to survive. This has created neurological pathways that make them instinctively protective of any small, vulnerable being, regardless of species. Watched as Hai yawned and rubbed her eyes. The excitement of her adventure was giving way to exhaustion, and she was beginning to realize she wanted to go back to her parents. The human immediately recognized the signs of distress in the child. What happened next would be discussed in circles for centuries to come. The human began to sing. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, unlike anything in the galactic databases of known music. It had the rhythm and tonal qualities that seemed specifically designed to soothe young beings. Hai's bioluminescent fur shifted to the soft purples and pinks of contentment as she listened, her eyes growing heavy. "He's singing her a lullaby," whispered in amazement. "That's not possible," Security Chief On protested. "How could it know songs appropriate for our children?" The consultant had an answer that shook everyone listening. Because lullabies aren't unique to individual species. The mathematical ratios, the melodic patterns that comfort young beings, they appear to be universal constants. This creature has somehow intuited the fundamental acoustic principles that bring peace to juvenile minds. As Hai's eyes fluttered closed, the human continued his gentle singing. But he also began scanning the area beyond his enclosure, his predator's awareness noting the positions of the security team. His expression shifted slightly, becoming more alert and protective. "He knows we're here," observed, and he's positioned himself between the child and perceived threats. It was then that everyone realized the true complexity of the situation. The human wasn't just entertaining a lost child. He was actively guarding her against what he saw as potential dangers, including the armed security team that had come to rescue her. "This creates a tactical problem," On reported grimly. "If we approach the child, the predator might interpret it as a threat to someone he's protecting. Our intel suggests humans can become extremely violent when defending others." Director found herself in an unprecedented situation. The galaxy's most dangerous predator had become the protector of a vulnerable child, and any attempt at rescue might trigger the very violence they were trying to avoid. "What if we tried communication?" suggested her assistant. "The linguistic analysis indicates humans have complex vocal capabilities." "Absolutely not," Captain interjected. "Direct communication with this creature could be seen as establishing a relationship which violates every containment protocol." But as they debated, the situation resolved itself in the most unexpected way. Hai had fallen asleep, curled up against the barrier with the human's hand pressed against the transparent wall near her head. The creature had somehow managed to convey a sense of safety so profound that the child felt secure enough to sleep in his presence. The human looked up at the security cameras, and for a moment his eyes seemed to find each observer in turn. Then he did something that sent shockwaves through the command center. He smiled and very carefully, very slowly, backed away from the barrier. His body language clearly indicated that he understood the child needed to be reunited with her own kind, and he was giving permission for the rescue to proceed. "Did he just?" started to ask. "Yes," confirmed, checking his readings. "The predator is voluntarily withdrawing to allow us access to the child. It's demonstrating rational cooperation and emotional intelligence at levels we've never recorded in any species." Security Chief On moved forward with extreme caution, expecting the human to change his mind and attack at any moment. But the creature remained at the far end of his enclosure, watching carefully but making no threatening moves. When On gently lifted the sleeping child, the human nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and approval. As the security team carried Hai away, she stirred briefly and looked back toward the human's enclosure. The creature raised one hand in what was unmistakably a farewell wave, and the child giggled softly before settling back into sleep. In the aftermath, as Hai was reunited with her frantic parents, and the facility underwent a complete security review, Director found herself staring at the human's containment unit with new understanding. "Captain," she said quietly too, "I think we need to revise our threat assessment." "Director, this creature is still extremely dangerous. The fact that it showed protective behavior toward one child doesn't change its fundamental nature." "Doesn't it?" She pulled up the complete behavioral analysis from the past few hours. "Look at these readings. When it detected a vulnerable child in its environment, its first instinct wasn't to hunt or harm. It was to protect and nurture. What kind of predator does that? Captain studied the data with growing unease. According to our military intelligence, the same kind that will fight to the death to protect anything it considers under its care. Director, if this creature has decided to protect something or someone, it becomes exponentially more dangerous to anything it perceives as a threat. The human was back to his calm observation of his surroundings, but something fundamental had changed. He was no longer just a captured predator in a cage. The incident with Hai had revealed that humans possessed something the galaxy had never encountered before, a predatory species that was also inherently protective of the innocent. As reports of the day's events began filtering up through military and scientific channels, across the galaxy started asking new questions. If humans would protect alien children, what did that say about their true nature? If their predatory instincts could be channeled toward protection rather than aggression, what did that mean for the galaxy's future? The warning about humanity would have to be rewritten. They were still the deadliest predators the galaxy had ever encountered. But they were also something else entirely. Guardians who would stand between the innocent and anything that threatened them, regardless of species, regardless of cost. In his enclosure, the human settled back into his routine of patient observation. But now there was something new in his expression as he studied his captors. He had shown them who he really was beneath the predator's exterior. Whether they chose to understand that revelation would determine not just his fate, but possibly the future relationship between humanity and the galaxy. The zoo had been warned about the galaxy's deadliest predator. What they discovered instead was something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more wonderful than they could have imagined. They had found humanity's greatest strength. The same fierce protectiveness that made them deadly enemies also made them the most loyal guardians the universe had ever seen.